I never thought I'd be the type of person to write something like this, but lately my head feels so heavy I can't keep it all inside anymore. A lot of my friends know bits and pieces of what went down, but no one really knows the full story, and honestly, I think they're tired of hearing it. I'm not even sure I want advice. I just want to put it all somewhere that doesn't echo back at me in my own voice. A few years ago, I landed what I thought was my dream job. It wasn't glamorous by any stretch, but for me it was stability, good pay, and the kind of work I believed in. The company was mid-sized, family-owned on paper, but the guy who really ran everything was the CEO who always acted like he was bigger than the building itself. Let's call him Jared. The kind of guy who always had to remind you how many hours he worked, how many deals he closed, how many people he fired. That sort of chest-thumping. At first I tolerated it. He could be a pain, but I was grateful to be working and I liked most of my coworkers. The office culture was smile through it because he could turn on you in an instant. I saw people let go for things like not fitting in or not respecting the vision. None of that ever made sense to me, but I kept my head down. Then came the contract. This was maybe 2 years in. Jared decided the company needed to cut costs, and suddenly we were all asked to sign new agreements. These papers basically stripped away protections, reduced overtime pay, and gave the company permission to make you work weekends without extra compensation. The way it was presented was manipulative too. He had the HR manager corner people in her office one by one, hand them the contract and say, "Sign this today if you want to stay." Everyone was terrified. I remember staring at the thing and thinking, this can't be right. I didn't sign immediately. I asked if I could take it home to read it carefully. The HR manager's face tightened and she said, "That's not really encouraged." But she let me. I spent that entire night combing through it. I'm not a lawyer, but I studied business in college, and I knew enough to see red flags. The language was full of vague clauses like management discretion and as determined appropriate by the company. Basically, they could make you do anything, anytime, and you'd have no recourse. I was angry, but I also felt cornered. Everyone else was signing. People had kids, mortgages, health problems. No one could afford to lose their job. The next morning I almost gave in, but something in me snapped. I thought about how much of my life I'd already given to that place, how many nights I stayed late to make sure deadlines were met, how I covered for other people when they were sick, how I gave Jared credit in meetings when it was really my work that saved a project. The idea that he could just erase protections with a signature made me feel sick. So I started digging. I went down rabbit holes online, searching labor laws, local statutes, anything that could help me understand whether this was even legal. And here's where fate stepped in. I found an old article in a digital archive that mentioned a state labor law passed in the 70s. It was one of those obscure protections that had never been repealed, even though most companies ignored it. In short, it said no employer in the state could force employees to sign away overtime rights under threat of termination. It was buried, forgotten, but technically still binding. My heart was pounding as I read it. I double-checked with state records, cross-referenced with newer laws, and sure enough, it was still in effect. That night I barely slept. The next morning I didn't sign. Instead I went to Jared's office, laid the unsigned contract on his desk, and said calmly, "This is illegal. You can't enforce it." His face turned red instantly. He started barking about how I didn't understand business, how the world doesn't care about my feelings, how if I didn't like it I could pack my things. I didn't flinch. I told him about the law, cited the statute number, and said if he fired me over this, I'd have no choice but to report him to the labor board. For a split second he froze, like he wasn't sure if I was bluffing. Then he tried to laugh it off, saying, "You've been on Google too much." But it wasn't Google. I had actual sources. I printed the statute and carried it with me. When I slid that paper across his desk, the room went dead quiet. He looked at it, then at me, and I could see in his eyes that he knew I had him. I walked out of that office shaking, but I felt like I'd just broken a chain around my neck. Word spread fast. People started asking me questions, and I told them what I found. By the end of the week, half the office refused to sign. A few even thanked me in whispers like we were in some kind of underground resistance. It didn't take long before Jared backpedaled. He sent an all-staff email saying the contract rollout was postponed pending further review, which was his way of admitting he'd been caught. He never apologized, of course. Men like him don't. But the contracts disappeared. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. From that point on, Jared had it out for me. I was left off meeting invites, excluded from projects, spoken to like I was a nuisance. He couldn't fire me without cause, so he tried to make me miserable instead. After a few months, I realized I couldn't stay. I loved my coworkers, but every day I felt like I was waiting for another shoe to drop. My anxiety got so bad I'd sit in the parking lot before work with my hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting the urge to just drive away. Eventually, I put in my notice. I found another job, not as prestigious, not as good on paper, but healthier for my mind. Leaving felt like breaking up with someone who never loved me back. Here's the part one don't tell my friends. Sometimes I regret it. Sometimes I feel guilty for leaving everyone else behind. I know I helped, but once I walked out, they had to face Jared on their own. A few of them have since moved on, but others are still there, still dealing with him. I carry both pride and bitterness. Pride that I stood up to him, bitterness that it even came to that. Bitterness that the law had been sitting there for decades, and no one in power cared until some ordinary employee dug it up at midnight. I don't know what lesson I'm supposed to take from all of this. People tell me to be proud, that I did the right thing. But sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I wonder if it even mattered. Jared is still rich, still running that company, still treating people like disposable parts. And I'm just someone who once pulled a forgotten law out of the dust to stop him for 5 minutes. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it's not. But I had to get it off my chest.